Hey, everybody, welcome to our new show. And we had a really big week a couple of weeks ago when we interviewed Lou Elizondo here on the same day as those hearings that took place in Washington, D.C. Got the biggest amount of numbers on everything that you could ever ask for, which proves, I guess, that Lou Elizondo is a very popular guy when he goes on something like this, but also he's a controversial guy. All I can say is that there were more of you joining us on our YouTube video and also in our podcast downloads than ever before in this show's history. So we assume that there's some new people watching and listening today. We want to welcome you to the family. We want to encourage you to spread the news, and we're very happy to have you here. It's been very gratifying to see that this Need to Know podcast is taking off and reaching more people. And I want to bring in my co-host Ross Coulthard here from Australia and welcome you back to the show as well, Ross. Thanks for being here. Let's get going.
I think this week we're going to look at an estimate of the situation, which is a homage way back to 1948, when there was, in fact, done inside the US Defense Department what was called an estimate of the situation. It was created by Project Sign, and essentially it assessed some very dramatic things that we'll get to, but basically it looked at the issue of what do we know about this phenomenon. And it essentially concluded, didn't it, Bryce, that extraterrestrials were making a full-scale observation of the Earth, but that attack did not seem imminent.
Well, that's exactly what it declared. I just want to set the stage because this is so important. The current Department of Defense doesn't like to talk about history, doesn't like to talk about the things that happened before, but we do, because we think people should be held accountable for what's gone on in the past. So just to orient everyone to what Ross was talking about, 1948, a Defense Department study initiated through the Air Force put out what they were asked to come up with, the estimate of the situation. In other words, you guys go look into the UFO situation, get back to us and tell us what you think is going on. And so the people who were tasked with doing that inside the Department of Defense came up with the conclusion that Ross just stated, which is they thought the situation was UFOs and the estimate was they were interplanetary. Now, here's what gets interesting about that. That, as reports do, that one kind of made it up the food chain until it got all the way up to the chief of staff of the Air Force, General Hoyt Vandenberg. And interestingly enough, Vandenberg not only rejected it, but he ordered that all copies of it be burned. Now, how do we?
And there's no surviving copies, are there, of the estimate of the situation?
Well, supposedly not. I mean, that would to me be like the holy grail of all things if that could be found.
But we know it exists. We know that it exists.
Because Ruppelt, who ran Project Blue Book, a guy we talked about in a previous episode, he's the guy that said, he said in his book that it existed, that he had laid eyes on it. He mentioned someone else, Air Force Major Dewey Fournet, who had seen it and who also said that he had seen it and read it, and that's what its conclusions were. So I think we have to take these gentlemen at their word, and that's what happened.
So we're a couple of weeks on from the 17th of May UAP hearing, the first hearing on UFOs, UAPs in 54 years, over half a century. And we thought we'd be a bit cheeky. We'd basically do our own estimate of the situation because clearly the Defense Department's a bit shy about doing one itself. But we got a bit of an idea, didn't we, Bryce, from what they think in the UAP hearing. And I think we should start this estimate by looking at the UAP hearing and then develop what we think is really going on. Because the whole idea of this show is to give a layperson a primer, not only about the history, but also about what's currently happening. So my gut reaction, my friend, from the UAP hearing, we were pretty merciless about it when we first did a story about it a couple of weeks back, but my resolve has hardened. I think that what Ron Moultrie and Scott Bray, two very senior intelligence officials from the Pentagon, were doing in that UAP hearing was a significant walk back from even the findings made by the UAP task force report on the 25th of June last year. Do you agree?
Well, I think it was their attempt at a significant walk back. Whether it turns into the walk back that they get away with remains to be seen. Interestingly enough, folks, we did one of our little need to know polls, and we got like almost 1,000 people commenting on it. And we asked people now that they had a few days to actually think about the hearings or the 1 day hearing, what was their take on it? And the four choices were disappointing, encouraging, not sure, and irrelevant. And I was surprised by this. 40% said it was disappointing. That didn't make me too surprised, but 38%, which is basically a dead heat, found it encouraging. So I think that the UFO/UAP community is divided on that hearing. And we hope to weigh in today a little more on it because, Ross, you are correct. It was disappointing to us. To me, it certainly was. And yet at the same time, this is, I guess, uh, I don't know. I can be disappointed and encouraged at the same time. I am disappointed in what actually occurred that day, and I am simultaneously a little bit encouraged that it's not going to end there. But as I say, others may disagree. You may disagree.
Now, look, one of the things that I think we should preface all of what came in the UAP hearing with was that DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, late last year, made a statement in Washington, D.C., that one possible explanation for what's going on here is what she used a word called extraterrestriality. Now, I think that was a very important red flag along the way. We hadn't heard that term yet. But for the first time, a very senior intelligence official of the US government, a serving intelligence official, was pointing to the possibility of extraterrestriality. And I think, mate, the glaring omission in the hearing from the 17th of May, the first congressional hearing, was that neither Ron Moultrie, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, nor Scott Bray, the Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, talked about the possibility, even the possibility of extraterrestriality. In fact,
although Ross, I should say the reason they probably didn't talk about that is they couldn't pronounce it any more than I could. And I don't even know if you go to the dictionary if it's a word, but I will say this: they should have paid heed to some of their bosses and the folks they take they take lunches with in the intelligence business, because not only did Avril Haines suggest that we had to keep open that possibility, but former CIA directors Clapper and Brennan have both in the past year basically made statements that leave it quite clear that they're thinking about the very same thing. So it was extremely odd to have people at the very top saying, oh yeah, we better keep our minds open to a really mind-blowing conclusion, while at the same time they send these two, I don't want to call them lackeys, because lackeys usually implies that they're lower level. These guys were not lower level, but they were clearly not there to have a meeting of the minds and share a lot of truth. They were not there for that.
Now, I want to work through this because this is very important, because I think there has been a walk back from the UAP task force report. And I'm really worried that what's happening here is that the Congress is being set up for a bit of a snow job by the Defense Department. And frankly, if they think they're going to get away with that, it ain't going to happen. So Scott Bray acknowledged that if and when UAP incidents are resolved, they likely fall into 5 explainable categories: airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, US government or US industry developmental programs, foreign adversary systems, or what the UAP task force called other, which is what Scott Bray calls another bin that allows for a holding bin of difficult cases and for the possibility of surprise and potential scientific discovery. Now, the bear in the room behind that other category is the possibility that what we're talking about here is some kind of non-human intelligence.
What they going back to the June 25th, 2021 report, they did call it a catch-all other bin, which I just found to be one of the greatest lines in UFO history. And if I have a book on UFO history I ever write, one of the chapters will be called The Pesky Catch-all Other Bin, because clearly if things were as normal as these guys tried to make it sound, then you wouldn't need a bin to throw all these other things in that didn't fit. And yet that's exactly what they've done. Now you have been doing some reading on all of this, Ross, and it seems to me that you're saying they're trying, it sounds like, to walk back even the other bin category slightly.
Well, I mean, I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit here, but one of the things that I leapt on was right at the very end of the hearing, Representative Krishnamurthy asked about wreckage. And that's the smoking gun question.
Right.
How about wreckage? This is the apocryphal mythological story that somewhere in Area 51 or a cave somewhere in the Nevada Teft Range, there's a flying saucer jacked up on blocks, and they've been hiding it for 70 years. And so Krishnamurthy, to his credit, asks, how about wreckage? Have we come across any wreckage of any kind of object that has now been examined by you? And Scott Bray from the Navy says, the UAP task force doesn't have any wreckage that isn't explainable, that isn't consistent with being of terrestrial origin. Now, okay, that's interesting because what the hell's he doing talking about the UAP task?
I was going to say, Ross, if we're going to parse this thing, that thing is wrong on so many different levels because, again, the UAP task force predated what supposedly is now the Airborne Object Identification Management and Synchronization Group, or AOMSGA, or as they called it,
or what we call impossible acronym.
Yeah, but it seems like a dodge to me, because they did refer over and over to the UAP task force, which supposedly has been subsumed into it. And also, I don't think anybody has ever actually stated that they think the UAP task force is in charge of crash wreckage. If we look at the historical record of crash wreckage, it goes back to the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. None of that would be true. It would have been in the Defense Department working with their private enterprise allies.
You see, I like to think the best of our public officials, Bryce, but in my book, that was an evasion by Scott Bray. And this is my problem with the representatives who weren't well informed, weren't well briefed, and weren't ready to hit with follow-up questions. Because the follow-up question to Mr. Bray should have been, sir, I didn't ask you about what the now non-existent UAP task force found about wreckage, or whether it has wreckage. Your question limited itself to the answer that the UAP task force doesn't have any wreckage that isn't explainable, that isn't consistent with terrestrial origin. What the representative should have hit him with, I mean, this is the smoking gun question, for heaven's sake.
Yeah.
You've even got officials like Lou Elizondo asserting that he believes that the United States government is in possession of anomalous technology, stuff that isn't possibly not human.
He said it. He said it on multiple national interviews, not just podcasts. He said it on big mainstream shows, and he's not the only guy saying it. And a lot of people are intimating it. So it does seem like the representative kind of missed an opportunity to say, well, thank you very much for that answer, but let me go a little bit further on this.
That was my issue. My issue was so many times we strayed to the very edge. It was like everybody there knew, oh gosh, we're talking about aliens, but we're embarrassed about that, so we're not going to talk about it. But fundamentally, at the heart of all of this, what we are talking about is the possibility of non-human intelligence or a non-human technology of some kind that is now being detected in our atmosphere. And so the glaring bear in the room, if you like, was that consistently the answers from the two witnesses acknowledged that there is something here that they can't explain. And he even acknowledged that there are, quote, our effort will involve the thorough, this is Moultrie, Ronald Moultrie, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, the highest intelligence official in the Pentagon. And he said, our effort with AOIMSG, impossibly named acronym, will include the thorough examination of adversarial platforms and potential breakthrough technologies, US government or commercial platforms, allied or partner systems, and other natural phenomenon. Nowhere in there was there a concession that overtly states, okay, we're looking at the possibility that this is extraterrestrial. Now, that to me is why I think this is a walkback, because
Well,
Avril Haines stipulated that one possible plausible explanation that required examination was the ridiculously stated extraterrestriality. She was
well,
referring to extraterrestrial life.
I'll give you a more plain-spoken word that they did seem to be using to walk things back, and it wasn't extraterrestriality or anything else unpronounceable. It was drone. All right. What I found that they did over and over, and I believe you feel the same way, is they tried to make it sound like, well, this really could just be drones. Well, I don't think drones work quite the same way that a lot of these sighting reports lay it out. But I know that's a particular bone of contention for yourself, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Oh boy, I've got a lot to say about drones, Bryce, and I think we should get into that in the next segment of Need to Know, coming up next. And when we finished off last time, we were talking about drones. We were talking about the fact that both Ronald Moultrie, who's the current top intelligence official in the Pentagon, and Scott Bray, another top intelligence official, they both started using the word drone, didn't they, Bryce, to describe the phenomena that are now being seen in the sky.
Well, and it feels a little dishonest, doesn't it? Because, I don't think anybody in this business, I'm certainly not, you're not, drones are a big deal. There are drones out there. There's lots of drones. Do we fly our own drones, harassing our own ships hundreds of miles at sea? Probably not. So,
okay. Well,
yeah.
where this came in was when the chairman of the committee, Mr. Schiff, he basically put the hypothesis to Mr. Bray that these are commercial drones. And it was because Mr. Bray had shown a video of a very underwhelming, blurry object zooming past a jet cockpit. And then there was another video of a triangular pyramid-shaped object that was shot on night vision above a Navy ship, an unnamed Navy ship. And these two videos were shown to the committee. And frankly, I don't know about you, Bryce, but I got the distinct impression that these were designed to completely underwhelm anybody who viewed them, because they were, I suggest, possibly the least interesting videos one could possibly choose from the cupboard that I have no doubt the Defense Department have, full of interesting UAP videos.
Well, that was the essence of our conversation with Lou Elizondo on our last episode, where it's clear he has seen things that vastly exceed what was being shown to the committee, and many other people claim the same. Christopher Mellon and so many others have obviously seen incredible things. So, had either of those two witnesses been free and clear to bring in the best stuff, they would have done it, and they would have blown some minds. So you do have to wonder what their motivation was, for sure.
Right. So Scott Bray, who's the Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, he presented this video, the night vision of a pyramid triangular-shaped UAP hovering over an unnamed US Navy vessel. He then asserted they were, quote, now reasonably confident that the objects were unmanned aerial systems in the area. And essentially, he told Mr. Schiff, the chairman, some type of drone, some type of unmanned aerial system. And he suggested essentially that what they were looking at was essentially a bokeh effect, that the night vision goggles had distorted the SLR camera lens to create a pyramid triangular shape. Now, the bokeh effect may indeed be a plausible explanation for that particular imagery. But I just think at this point in the hearing, the public were being led astray, because the whole drone issue is vitally important for an understanding of what was being explained before the committee there. And this is where I think the committee were failing to do their job, because essentially There's a huge issue with this drone claim, as you've already flagged. The incidents that we're talking about were very well explained by the Drive online magazine way back in May 2021. And they explained that in over several nights in July 2019, there were multiple drone swarms seen over Navy vessels at least 100 miles out to sea. It included the USS Kidd, the US Navy destroyers USS Rafael Peralta, the Russell, the John Finn, and the Paul Hamilton. So there was quite a number of US Navy vessels. Now, the interesting thing to me, Bryce, is that when you look at what the Drive very well reported, in the logs that were recorded by the crew, there's at least one reference to, quote, a white light hovering over the ship's deck. And that's taken from the ship's log. That doesn't sound like a drone to me. It doesn't sound like a commercial drone, which frankly is the impression that I believe the two Defense Department witnesses wanted the audience, the congressman and the listening public, to come away with.
The reason that I feel a little more maybe optimistic that the door is still going to get kicked down than you might, Ross, is that I think we can pivot the point of contact, if you will, for this issue from, we already know that there are objects out there that are defying flight characteristics, and that's been well reported and talked about. And obviously we've attempted to talk about that on this show. Now, I think there are going to be Senate and further House hearings. And one of the things they might easily focus in on is, okay, you have invoked the D word many times, folks. That's the drone word. What we'd like to know is, what are the flight characteristics of drones? Because we'd like to know how that would explain some of these cases, like you were just talking about, and things that were talked about in the Drive. These are wild characteristics for even drones, and it would be really impressive to start to figure out whether it even could be a drone that would be doing those things, let alone why they would be doing them to our own forces.
Okay.
And then finally, I guess the question about drones has got to be, all right, you have come here from the Department of Defense. You're trying to make me think that these are drones. Sir, please tell us who you think is behind these drones. Certainly, the Department of Defense must have theories, or you're not doing your job, because your job is to keep us secure and safe. Who's building these crazy drones?
And that's where I started screaming at the screen, watching these guys, because they're just sitting there meekly, letting these two Defense Department officials lead the public into the impression that, don't worry about this. This is just commercial drones. It'll all go away. But the thing I find incredible, Bryce, is that the incident that sourced this drones claim happened in 2019. So that's 3 years ago. 3 years ago. And it's quite clear that the two top officials in intelligence in the Pentagon still have no bloody idea what those supposed drones were that were buzzing the US Navy fleet off the coast of California.
I guarantee you, Ross, there's got to be guys in the Department of Defense who have more than a bloody idea about it. We just need to get them before Congress.
Absolutely. And that's the issue. So there's a few issues I really want to drill into, because this drone explanation really needs to be critically appraised. And if Congress people are going to be asking further questions, they need to be aware of these issues. I've flown drones. You know, one of the explanations that was given was that these were commercial drones. And I know most drones really can only go for about 28 minutes. And yet the encounter itself, the minimum encounter that the Drive noted, was about 90 minutes. This is a commercial drone, supposedly, hovering over US Navy vessels far out in the ocean, open ocean, 100 miles out to sea. And what the Drive report very, very credibly and carefully did was investigate whether the other ships that were in the area at the time could plausibly have been deploying drones against these American Navy vessels. It didn't wash. There is no possibility that it could have been the passing cruise ship. I think there was one called the Carnival Imagination, or a cargo vessel, the Alguita. They did a thorough investigation. And this is where Congressman representatives shouldn't have allowed themselves to be distracted by a ridiculous drone explanation. And the simple fact is, the Drive concluded in their 2021 story, commercially available drones are not commonly capable of flying for such long durations across great distances with speeds in excess of 45 miles an hour. We estimate the drones traversed at least 100 nautical miles in the July 14th incident. Furthermore, they were able to catch and locate a destroyer travelling at 16 knots in conditions with less than 1 nautical mile of visibility. Their operators seem to have coordinated at least 5 to 6 drones simultaneously. Then there's the question of line of sight control and control methods in general, which make the capabilities described all that much more puzzling. It's just ridiculous, Bryce, when you actually look at the drone explanation.
And not only that, I think we have to always keep invoking history. Okay. And by that, here's what I mean. We know when it comes to UFOs that there are some things in the UAP world that are exhibiting characteristics that are impossible. And people then say, well, that could easily be our own technology or Russia or China. So then you have to go back and say, yes, but in the 1940s and 50s, would that have been possible? And I say the same thing. All right, if people want to now ascribe some of these things to just being our drones or their drones, folks, the Navy's been reporting things going on around their ships going back to the 40s, 50s, 60s. Were these incredible drones back then? I don't think so. So we have to look a little deeper. We have to say anything that is going to be used to explain modern UAP has to also explain past UFOs.
And it also has to explain the times when those objects have demonstrated what Lou Elizondo, the former head of the Pentagon's UFO investigation program, has dubbed the 5 observables. And even Representative Schiff picked up, he's the chairman of the committee, he picked up on the fact that the original UAPTF report acknowledged that some of those 144 objects that they investigated exhibited flight characteristics that appeared to demonstrate advanced technology. Some of them appeared to remain stationary, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or they moved at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. And that was an interesting point, because Scott Bray from Navy Intelligence admitted under questioning that he knew of no foreign adversary who was capable of moving a craft without discernible means of propulsion. And he also, and this is something that I think people have missed, he also admitted that, quote, there is some degree of something that looks like signature management from some of these UAPs.
Right.
So he seems to be suggesting that these commercial drones that they've left the committee with the impression they are some kind of stealth technology that is actually cloaking themselves. So now we've got drones capable of Klingon cloaking devices. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And, we were talking about Elizondo being on. And by the way, from time to time, we like to correct the record when we make a mistake. And one of the things that Lou said was, he quoted Bob Marley saying, you can fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all the people all the time. I just wanted to point out, that's a great quote. And Bob Marley did put it in his song, Get Up, Stand Up, but it was Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, who said you can fool all the people some of the time and some of the people all the time, but you can't fool all the people all of the time. And I think that applies to these hearings that we're about to have. There will be some smoke thrown out there, but if there's a fire out there, we're still going to see it. At least some of the people are going to see it. And I look forward to the very thing that you're doing, which is you're taking the specifics, you're taking their own words, and you're digging a little deeper. I can't wait for a Senate hearing where Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is in there, because I've seen her in operation on these hearings. She's I believe, a former prosecutor, and she doesn't do what some of these congressmen did in this last hearing, where somebody tosses off an incomplete answer to something and you just kind of go on with your notes to the next thing. She says, excuse me, that's not the question I asked. I'd like to know. And I think that's where these hearings are going to start pivoting. They're going to get better witnesses in them. and B, they're going to actually listen to what the witnesses proffer as their answers and demand better answers and more complete answers.
I completely agree with you. And I'm conscious that we're coming to the end of this segment, Bryce.
Yeah.
So I just think we need to put a stake through the heart of the drone explanation. Either way,
Yeah.
it's implausible. It was a huge security breach. You had Navy vessels being buzzed by drones, supposedly, some kind of unmanned aerial vehicle, they claim. But essentially, when you look at the logbooks, they're describing a large white light. So is the drones terminology an attempt to mislead and deceive? There's also some kind of, there's also a harassing action. Who was harassing? I mean, you still got 3 years on in what seems like an egregious breach of a naval training area. Some power, some adversary, some intelligence brought some kind of object in that was interfering with the operations of a naval task force. And if this was a supposed foreign adversary spooking the US Navy in its own training area, where were these supposed drones coming from? And frankly, it doesn't wash with me. And I noticed Jeremy Corbell, who's, I think, quite creditably leaked some of the videos that we're talking about here that were featured in the Navy videos. Jeremy Corbell issued a social media video a couple of days ago where he basically said that the Pentagon should still release the other 3 sets of data they've got on these images: radar data, thermal imagery, and deck footage. He accused the Navy of only showing the committee the green night vision goggle footage, and frankly, misleading them in the course of doing that. And he also challenged the DoD on why it still didn't say, if it knew, who the controller of those UAPs or whatever the vehicles were. He says, frankly, they still don't know 3 years on.
Extending this argument is going to be the next battleground where, for example, most of the people who are listening or watching us right now have seen some version of those 3 Navy videos that were released back in 2017. Well, why not show the whole thing? Why not tell us? Why not show everything and let us let the chips fall where they may? Why not give us all the radar? Why not all the data on that stuff? I mean,
and just before we head off for the final segment, Jeremy Corbell also said that he's got numerous other videos that have been leaked to him from inside the Defense Department that he would be comfortable releasing if and only if the sources were given an immunity from prosecution for releasing them to him. So coming into segment 3, Bryce, this is our estimate of the situation. Is the Congress really taking the issue seriously, or are these show hearings? Are they actually going to front up and ask real questions?
Well, you and I may disagree on that, but I'll tell you one thing that we're going to do on the next side of this break. There were a couple of key places where those 2 witnesses at the May 17th hearing said, I don't really know anything about that. And they were things that were just shocking that they would know nothing about and hard to believe. So you know what? We're going to try to do the Department of Defense a favor. And since their guys don't know anything about history, we're going to school them. We're going to school them good. Be right back. Well, we're back, and we want to go back to that famous May 17th hearing. I know it almost feels like we're beating a dead horse, but it's so important because it was, again, the first congressional hearing in 54 years when it occurred on May 17th. Now, one of the things that happened that was so curious to both Ross and myself is that on a couple of big issues, Moultrie and Bray, who were testifying, sort of acted like, don't really know too much about that. And the one that really needs to be dealt with straight up right now is where a Representative Mike Gallagher literally tried to hold Scott Bray's feet to the fire on the issue of the idea that these UAP that he's supposed to be reporting on have routinely been noticed interacting or near nuclear power and nuclear weapon sites, and that should be something that he would know something about, primarily because they've also reported it. And most of what we know about these incidents in the past have come from Freedom of Information Act documents that have been released. But he did not believe that, Ross. He acted like, yeah, no, I never really heard of that. How is
Look,
that possible?
the thing that shocked me, Bryce, was, and again, I keep on saying I like to think the best of our public officials. I mean, Ronald Moultrie and Scott Bray are the creme de la creme of
Yeah,
the US Defense Department's intelligence, cadre of officers. They are meant to be the best of the best.
sure.
They knew they were coming in and to talk to a committee about UAPs, UFOs. And they knew that the committee members were going to be asking them some curly questions. So I presume they'd prepared for this. I presume that they'd had briefings with their executive staff where they'd basically taken prepared questions. And surely to heavens, the most important question of all, the issue that's probably the biggest national security issue for the United States, is that its strategic nuclear deterrence has clearly, for the last 75 years, been a subject of interest for the objects.
Let's make that specific. One of the things that he said he didn't really know anything about was the Malmstrom Air Force Base incident. And I think we should probably explain it to him. But you do a better job because you just wrote about it more recently in that great book of yours, In Plain Sight. So why don't you, for the benefit of the DoD, just in case Mr. Bray or Mr. Moultrie happen to be listening in and they're still not really sure about what happened at Malmstrom, I think you should tell them.
Okay, well, Malmstrom's just a tip of an iceberg. There are multiple incidents, and my friend and colleague Robert Hastings, whose fantastic book, UFOs and Nukes, has told this very, very well. He's investigated ICBM sites all over the United States, and he's interviewed people who've crewed those ICBM sites, the places where intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles are stored and made ready for, God forbid, the event of nuclear war. And one of the people I interviewed was a guy called Bob Salas, who was at Malmstrom in Malmstrom or Malmo, I've forgotten. But anyway, he was at one of the ICBM bases in the 1970s when literally all 10 of the nuclear missiles in his silo, on his evidence, went offline one by one as a gigantic red UAP object hovered overhead. And the interesting thing is there's no acknowledgement from either of these two witnesses. Moultrie and Bray feigned ignorance of, you're making a bit of mic noise there, Bryce.
Sorry.
Moultrie and Bray feigned ignorance of what, frankly, I think is an extraordinarily significant event. And if you read the UK Condign report, which frankly any competent intelligence official should be across, it acknowledged 25, 30 years ago the British government had spoken to Russian commanders,
Right.
namely a guy called Colonel Boris Sokolov, who acknowledged at the end of the Cold War, at a time when the Russians were talking to us, that the Russians had actually incidents where their nuclear missiles were wound up. They were literally one button press away from launch. So whatever the phenomenon is, it's demonstrated an ability to meddle with nuclear weapons, the most dangerous weapons on the planet. That's why this matters. And for two intelligence officials to make the specious assertion that they had no knowledge of that kind of incident, frankly, is where I started to think that we were being snowed.
It was a snow job. I just, you brought it up. I just want people to know about this book. It's a great book, UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapon Sites by Robert Hastings. I've been reading it again over the past few days. I mean, that's a lot of information about nuclear weapon sites that have come up. And for them to pretend they knew nothing about it. Another great book that talks about it is UFOs and Government, a Historical Inquiry by Michael Swords and Robert Powell. This is another fantastic read. And the point I'm making is not that I can hold up books, which anybody can do, but that there is information that's already out there in the public where researchers and analysts and people like Ross and myself can go get that information. So it's really ironic that the military guys act like they've never heard of it, or they'll, oh, I'll look into it. It's already out there. And you mentioned Robert Salas, who is a great patriot. He is the man who was in charge at Malmstrom when this happened. And by the way, it wasn't just a red light. To the best of my reading on this latest thing, they also saw structural craft. All right, I saw a reference to a disc. So these were people calling Robert Salas saying there's a disc out here, and then these 10 nukes go offline. And it isn't like this has been a hidden secret. As early as 2010, Salas and a number of other military officials who I point out were trusted to watch over America's nuclear weapons that, if fired, could end the world, because they would have created a counterattack from the Soviet Union. And yet they don't know about these guys. They held a news conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and they laid out their case. They did it most recently, just another year or so ago, I believe. And listen, it isn't just the military, and life is changing. But on that 2010 one, I remember reading that the Washington Post sent a reporter over to cover it. But guess who they sent? They sent a lifestyle reporter who began his story about nuclear weapons being buzzed by UFOs by describing the chocolate chip cookies at the press club. This is an overall problem, Ross. It isn't just the military. The military is using this as a way to obfuscate what's going on, but they've had help from ourselves. Our own representatives in the media have been complicit in sort of selling this narrative that, oh, ha, 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 it couldn't really be happening. Well, it has happened, and you don't have to take our word for it. The U.S. military were the ones that wrote these reports that are in these books I'm talking about.
Exactly. I mean, indeed, if you read Robert Hastings' book, it cites FOI documents that talk about these incidents. So for two of the top officials in the intelligence section of the Department of Defense to assert that they have no knowledge about nuclear weapons being a subject of interest by these UAPs, including incidents where, as the TV show that TTSA did, Unidentified, they basically talked about objects firing beams down at, for example, RAF Bentwaters in the United Kingdom. There is clearly a technology, a solid physical technology, craft, vehicles of some kind, hovering over US nuclear facilities where the most dangerous weapons in the world are stored, and they're taking an extremely close interest in that weaponry. And for two officials of the United States government to swear to a congressional committee that they didn't know about this, that they're not briefed about this, that's just appalling.
It's appalling.
The fact that they haven't been briefed about that is a disgrace.
Now, to go wind this back to the hearing aspect of it, I literally was just in conversation by internet today with Robert Salas. And Robert Salas is getting prepared to do what? To testify at hearings. But guess what? Not U.S. hearings. He's been invited to go to Brazil and testify. All right. And I think it's fantastic that he's doing that. And I have a high expectations for the Brazilians, who seem to have taken this whole situation very seriously, more seriously, at least publicly, than the U.S. government has over the years. And so my advice to anybody would be, Robert Salas is not only a patriot, but he was a man of impeccable honesty. Bring him into Congress. Let him tell his story. He's told it 1,000 times, but he's never been allowed to tell it in front of the American people in a congressional hearing. And I think it would be an excellent way to start. And frankly, I hope if they ever do pull Robert Salas and people like him in to testify, I'd like to see Moultrie and Bray sitting in the front damn row and taking notes. That's what I'd like to see.
So, Bryce, where are we at with our estimate of the situation? What's your take on the phenomenon? Because frankly, I'm very glum after those UAP hearings. I do not detect a willingness, an aggression by congressional representatives, and I do not detect a willingness to engage by top intelligence officials. The feeling overwhelmingly that I take away from the first of the congressional hearings is a sense that we have no cause to feel that there is going to be any full disclosure by the US government. They're being disingenuous. At worst, they're being deceitful. And possibly, to give them the best possible explanation, they were just very poorly briefed. I mean, for example, one of the other things they didn't talk about was the Admiral Wilson document.
Absolutely. I mean, okay. So we talked about that on our last show, how, again, it was Gallagher who basically put the so-called Wilson Davis memo into the congressional record, which is one of the more radical things that's ever happened. Now, I got to tell you, and I'm full disclosure for myself, I had a hard time getting my brain wrapped around the Wilson Davis documents. For years, I've had people try to explain it to me, and I listen, and it seems to go in that side and come out the other. And it wasn't until, frankly, Russ, that I read In Plain Sight, where I thought you did a very excellent job of explaining what it was all about. And so I think you should probably do your very excellent job one more time for people, because again, this is something that these two guys who sat and testified claimed they knew absolutely nothing about. And yeah, maybe
I'm just going to have some fun here, Bryce. It was like, I think Ronald Moultrie turned to Scott Brown and went, "Oh, you know anything about the Wilson document? You know anything about it?" No, never heard about it. So seriously, this document purports to be a record of notes taken by Dr. Eric Davis, a very well-respected astrophysicist who currently works for Aerospace Corporation, who at the time these notes were taken in 2002 was working for Robert Bigelow, the private space entrepreneur, through his organization known as NIDS, the National Institute of Discovery Science. And somehow, in the course of his research into the phenomenon, Eric Davis managed to wangle a meeting with the immediate former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, a very big kahuna in the US Defense Department, Admiral Tom Wilson. Now, everything I'm about to say here didn't happen, according to Tom Wilson. Admiral Tom Wilson has said to me, for the purposes of writing my book, and he said publicly to other journalists like Billy Cox and numerous other people who've approached him, he said this conversation didn't happen. But the reason it matters is because notes of this purported conversation emerged from the estate of Edgar Mitchell, the former well-respected, highly regarded Apollo 14 astronaut. And when Edgar Mitchell died a few years ago, I think 2016, these notes were passed on to a person who saw their historical significance and made sure they came out to the right people. Now, I preface everything I say here by saying we cannot rely on the Admiral Wilson notes. But the reason they are significant is because if they are authentic, and some people suggest they might be, and indeed the author of the notes allegedly has conspicuously refused to deny their authenticity, it's very important because those notes describe essentially a crash retrieval program inside the US government, the most incredible conspiracy. And as a friend of mine said to me over the weekend when we were talking about them, he said, "Look, Ross, I just don't believe them because they read like a movie script." And they do. They read like a movie script. You've got a private aerospace company that is caught by Tom Wilson secretly concealing recovered alien technology in a private aerospace facility, and it's been hidden away by some kind of dark conspiracy inside the Defense Department, and it's only known by a few key people in the Defense Department. But essentially, the allegation is that sometime in the late years of the Cold War, around the late 1980s, we recovered a life form, and they recovered a craft, and that craft has been where they discovered a life form. And this is echoing, of course, things that were told to Tom DeLonge in the WikiLeaks notes. But essentially, the allegation is that there is a craft, multiple craft, somewhere inside private aerospace.
And if they're true, and again, I think you did a good job of disclaiming that they might not be true, but if they are, they're explosive. And one way to resolve it would be to drag those people in front of Congress and make them swear an oath to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and
And
see what
that's
they
the
say
point.
about it.
That's the
But
point, is that the easiest way to fix this is, as you say, just to
so I do
call
find it okay. There's two issues there on those that we talked about that messengers Moultrie and Bray didn't actually know anything about. The first is absolutely inexcusable. That is the connection between nuclear weapons and the UFO issue. That's inexcusable. They've been all over it. The Wilson Davis memo. I would think that they would have a knowledge of it, but whether they, give credence to it or not, listen, it would be easy for them not to. They could have dodged that bullet. I just want to answer your question because I know we're running out of time, and you took a stab at saying what you thought the estimate of the situation was, and I would just like to say that's a two-part answer that we're never going to get to in this particular episode. Despite calling it the estimate of the situation. Part one is, okay, well, are we optimistic or pessimistic in our estimate of what the congressional hearing situation is? And then part two is, well, what do we really think is going on? These are very big, different questions. I am not pessimistic. I do share your frustration that we've been misled. I think this horse is out of the barn. My assessment is I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying we're not going to get our hair mussed in this whole thing, but I am saying that it's moving forward, and these hearings are going to continue. There'll be other hearings, and there'll be explosive things. And just as one example, when we were talking about the polls, I put one out the other day that said, imagine you wake up next week and someone somehow has leaked an extended HD video shot by the U.S. military of an obviously solid technological object that is clearly outside our current capabilities. What happens then? Nearly 2,000 people voted on it. It's interesting because this goes to the source of your sort of pessimism. 47% of our respondents said nothing will change, even with a giant HD video. 34% said everything will change. The rest didn't know or didn't care. I take your point, Ross. It is possible that somebody could literally dump the truth in front of people and they'd still go, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether to believe anybody anymore because that's the world we live in. So yeah, you might be right. There might be some good reason to believe we're not going to get to the bottom of it. I don't believe it. I think we are. I think it's coming. I don't think it's happening before this election. I think it's happening in 2023.
I'm going to leave our listeners and viewers with this document. This is the slide 9 document that I keep on coming back to. In my estimate of the situation, I think that the conclusions that we're eventually going to reach about the phenomenon lie inside this advice that was given to the Undersecretary for Defence by members of the ATIP program. And essentially at the heart of it is the sense that what we're talking about here is something that is far more complex than extraterrestrial phenomena, a life from another planet. Essentially, whatever this is, it's capable of psychotronic weaponry, a cognitive human interface, penetration of solid surfaces, instantaneous sensor disassembly, alteration and manipulation of biological organisms, anomalies in the space-time construct, and unique human cognitive interface experiences. Whatever was considered phenomenon in the past is now quantum physics. My estimate of the situation is slide 9, Bryce.
Yeah.
I don't think the best explanation is extraterrestrial, and that's what Jacques Vallée has said all along. And I think part of the problem, part of the reason why the Defense Department is being evasive with us, is they have no bloody idea what they're dealing with. And this is the advice. The reason slide 9 is so important is because this is the advice that was given to the Undersecretary for Defence by their own UFO investigators. And I think this document has been ignored by too many people.
Well, Roscoe, I was ready to go to the break and say goodnight, folks. We're out of here. And then you had to throw slide 9 on here. And that slide 9 in the fire has, the whole thing is up. Okay, I do agree with you. Slide 9, which, by the way, we should go into in more detail in a future show. I do think that pulls the curtain back quite widely to say there's more here than the simple explanations. But if I was going to put my estimate out there, and again, this is just my estimate from doing the same thing you've been doing, which is reading, thinking, studying, talking to people. I think we're going to find out that it's not A or B, it's all of the above. So I do think slide 9 gives you the peek behind the curtain. Is there an extraterrestrial component? When the truth is known, I'm going to say yes, there's going to be an extraterrestrial component to this as well, because all of that could still coexist with the slide 9 stuff that you talked about. So I guess we should get out of here.
Well, it's been lovely talking to you all. We'll be back next time to blow your minds even further on Need to Know.
We can handle the truth, folks. People, get ready.